When your wounds become your wisdom, the revolutionary power of reframing your darkest moments. Thank you all for being here today. I stand before you humbled, electrified, and forever changed by a conversation that has fundamentally altered how I understand human resilience, personal transformation, and the true nature of healing. I recently had the extraordinary privilege of interviewing Mischa Scott, a visionary whose work has ignited a revolution in how we process pain and transform trauma. Misha isn't just another self help guru or motivational speaker. She is a paradigm shifter whose methodology has created ripples of profound healing across communities, particularly among Black women professionals who have spent decades in survival mode, carrying burdens that were never theirs to bear. What makes Misha's insights so revolutionary is how they challenge everything we've been conditioned to believe about strength, vulnerability, and what it truly means to heal. Her work doesn't just invite change, it demands it. It doesn't just suggest transformation, it insists upon it with a fierce, unapologetic love that refuses to let us remain comfortable in our wounds. Today, I'm going to share wisdom that might feel uncomfortable, even provocative. But I promise you this: if you lean into this discomfort, if you allow yourself to be challenged, you might just walk away with the keys to unlocking a power within you that has remained dormant far too long. Let me begin by flipping a common saying on its head. When the teacher's ready, the student will appear. Pause on that for a moment. We've all heard the reverse, that when the student is ready, the teacher appears. But Misha Scott helped me understand something profound. Our greatest lessons arrive not when we're desperately searching, but when we are finally prepared, when our hearts have been cracked open enough to receive them. How many times have you encountered the same painful lesson repeatedly until you were finally ready to learn it? How many relationships, jobs, or situations have you cycled through only to realize they were all teaching you the same thing? The core revelation Misha Scott shared, one that has the power to transform your relationship with every single challenge you will ever face, is this: stop seeing life's obstacles as things happening to you and start seeing them as things happening for you. Every rejection, every betrayal, every closed door, every heartbreak, every failure, these aren't punishments, they're redirections. They aren't barriers, they're invitations. They aren't endings, they're beginnings disguised as endings. This isn't spiritual bypassing or toxic positivity that ignores genuine pain. This is strategic reframing that acknowledges the wound while refusing to live inside it forever. When we encounter difficulty, our instinct is to ask, why is this happening to me? But Misha suggests a radically different question: what lesson was meant for me here? That single shift transforms pain into power and setbacks into stepping stones. Let me share with you three powerful stories of women who embody this principle. Women whose lives were completely transformed when they stopped asking, why me? And started asking, what for? First, there's Walanza Hall. Picture a corporate boardroom, that space where vulnerability is traditionally seen as weakness, where emotion is considered unprofessional, where being tough is the only acceptable currency. In this environment, Walanza made a decision that seemed career suicide at the time. She chose to lead with softness. When her team was burning out, instead of pushing harder, she created space for rest. When colleagues made mistakes, instead of punishment, she offered compassion. When difficult conversations were needed, instead of aggression, she brought authenticity. The response was immediate and harsh, too soft, not executive material, lacks backbone. But Walanza refused to harden herself. She recognized something profound, that her so called weakness was actually her greatest strength. She leaned deeper into her empathy, prioritizing mental well being over grind culture, and encouraged her team to do the same. The transformation was remarkable. Team retention skyrocketed. Innovation flourished where fear had once dominated. Most significantly, she created a sanctuary for Black professionals who had previously felt forced to choose between authenticity and advancement. I had spent years thinking I needed armor to succeed, Walanza shared, but it was only when I removed that armor, when I allowed myself to be seen fully and completely, that I discovered my true power. Walanza's story illuminates what Mischa Scott calls strategic vulnerability, the revolutionary understanding that softness isn't weakness, it's a superpower. By leading with authenticity rather than performative toughness, we access depths of creativity, connection, and resilience that remain inaccessible to those hiding behind masks of invulnerability. But this principle extends beyond professional spaces, as our second story powerfully demonstrates. Brandy Award carried generational trauma so heavy it threatened to crush her teen motherhood, domestic violence, periods of homelessness. Society had written a script for her: shame, silence, smallness. For years, Brandy battled the voice inside that whispered she was unworthy, damaged, defined by her past. The conventional wisdom would suggest compartmentalizing that pain, hiding those parts of her story, separating her professional identity from her personal journey. But Brandia did something revolutionary instead. She reframed her narrative from victimhood to survivorship and began sharing her authentic stories publicly. The very things I was taught to be ashamed of, Brandy says, became my most powerful teaching tools. My wounds became my wisdom when I stopped hiding them and started offering them as bridges for others to cross. This vulnerability fostered community healing and inspired thousands with the message that worthiness is inherent, not earned through perfection or achievement. After spending years navigating space that seemed closed to her, Brande discovered that her vulnerability was actually her access key. She became a fierce advocate for first generation entrepreneurs facing systemic barriers, helping reshape dialogue about what success looks like, especially for those historically excluded from mainstream definitions. Brandy's story embodies another key insight from Mischa Scott. Self worth is non negotiable. Your value isn't determined by past mistakes or society's expectations. You must grant yourself permission to thrive and give yourself grace through every stage of your journey. Our third story reveals how these principles can be applied to establish healthy boundaries, something many high achieving women struggle with profoundly. Suzette Simons entered corporate America determined to prove herself. Like many Black women in predominantly white spaces, she encountered constant microaggressions and biases undermining her authority and expertise. The unspoken expectation was clear: work twice as hard for half the recognition and never ever complain. For years, Suzette internalized this message. She stayed late, took on extra projects, said yes to every request, and swallowed her objections when colleagues took credit for her ideas. The result: complete burnout, physical illness, emotional exhaustion, spiritual depletion. The turning point came when Suzette realized something profound. My boundaries aren't just about saying no to others, they're about saying yes to myself. Rather than continuing to overextend herself, Suzette developed emotional boundaries rooted in clarity about her personal values rather than external expectations. She began declining projects that didn't align with her purpose. She started leaving work at reasonable hours without apology. She spoke up when interrupted in meetings. Most revolutionary of all, she rested unapologetically without explanation. I had to unlearn the idea that my worth was tied to my productivity, Suzette explains. I had to challenge the belief that boundaries would limit my success. What I discovered instead was that boundaries actually expanded my impact because I was no longer exhausted and resentful. Suzette became a role model for other Black professionals, teaching them that setting boundaries enhances, not diminishes, their impact across all areas of life. She empowered colleagues who previously believed they had no choice but to endure toxic workplace dynamics. These three women, Walanza, Brandy, and Suzette, embody what Mischa Scott calls the transformative power of reframing. They didn't deny their challenges or minimize their pain. Instead, they asked different questions about their experiences and discovered new possibilities as a result. This approach represents a fundamental shift in how we process difficulty. Most of us have been conditioned to believe that strength means pushing through, that success requires sacrifice, that vulnerability is weakness. But what if those assumptions are wrong? What if our greatest power comes not from denying our wounds, but from transforming them into wisdom? Studies in post traumatic growth confirm this counterintuitive truth. Individuals who find meaning in their suffering often experience greater resilience and even flourishing after trauma. This isn't about denying pain, it's about refusing to let pain have the final word in your story. In my conversation with Misha Scott, one phrase kept emerging that has haunted me ever since: softness as strategy. This isn't about being passive or weak. It's about recognizing that true strength often looks different than we've been taught. It looks like setting boundaries without apology. It looks like resting without explanation. It looks like embracing healing, wholeness, and emotional honesty. For too many of us, especially high achieving women, we've spent years in survival mode. We've led teams, raised families, carried communities. But at what cost? The exhaustion is real. The burnout is epidemic. And as Misha Scott so powerfully puts it, you cannot pour from an empty cup and you cannot lead from an empty heart. I want to leave you with a challenge today, one that might feel uncomfortable, but holds the potential to transform everything. Take one wound from your story, one rejection, one failure, one heartbreak, and sit with it this week. Instead of asking, why did this happen to me? Ask, what did this reveal for me? What strength did it uncover? What wisdom did it forge? What direction did it ultimately point you toward? Write it down, speak it aloud, share it with someone you trust. Because here's the revolutionary truth: your deepest wounds can become your greatest gifts to the world, but only if you're brave enough to reframe them, only if you're willing to see the lesson wrapped inside the pain. The world doesn't need more exhausted warriors wearing armor too heavy to carry. The world needs whole healed humans who have transformed their pain into purpose and their challenges into change. As Misha Scott says, when you heal yourself, you heal generations before and after you. That's not just personal transformation, that's revolution. And revolution, my friends, begins with reframing. Thank you.